Fingerhut, will you continue at your will?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. That, as I said, that was Schoolhouse Rock, in case you didn't recognize the soundtrack for our afternoon session. With the little taste of digital learning that we got at lunchtime, and thank you again to Marcy and the students and the teachers, and to Clarissa out in California for joining us. We now want to dig into this in a meaty way, and to do that at the beginning of our conversation, we're very fortunate to have truly the leading national expert on this subject. When I think about digital learning, I think about both the expanding opportunities to learn, which is what we heard about at lunchtime, new courses, new content available online, but also the use of technology to improve teaching and learning for each child. What can we really do with these tools that enables us to improve outcomes for all of our students? And in this field, there really is nobody nationally who is better known and more respected than Tom Vander Ark. Tom is a successful, you have his bio, so I won't repeat it all, but he's a very successful entrepreneur who, after his business success, decided to commit his professional talents to education, became a school superintendent, and then, as I've mentioned to the commission before, was appointed as the first education lead at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he was responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars of grants in educational innovation across the country, much of which was in Ohio. So he's very familiar with Ohio, has been to Columbus many times and across the state, and so he knows our structures and our leaders quite well. Since leaving the Gates Foundation, has committed his professional work to this very subject of digital learning through his organization, Getting Smart. He's published, he blogs, he's really the expert on this field. So it's our real good fortune to have Tom here to participate with us and to advise our commission on this area. I'm going to leave Tom alone to do whatever he wants with you for the next hour, to both speak to you, answer questions, and engage in dialogue with you. And then, as I mentioned, we'll follow that up with, after that, after you've fully taken advantage of Tom's presence, we will then talk a little bit about the technical aspects of IT. I can't tell you how many comments I've gotten about that chart this morning, Rhonda, from your study. The 90% of the teachers frustrated with the use of technology. And as I look around this table, I know that we don't accept that as a reality for Columbus. So we don't want to feel limited by what we can do with the technological infrastructure. So I'll ask you to put that frustration aside until later this afternoon, and instead let your minds really embrace the full possibilities with Tom Vander Ark. Tom?
Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You had a really good conversation this morning, and I'd like to start with another 15 or 20 minutes of just interactive conversation about what you heard, about what you liked, and about what you're concerned about. 3-minute introduction to that. To be completely melodramatic, I think we're living through the most interesting and important shifts in the way human beings learn that anybody's ever experienced. It really is, as you heard this morning, this is bigger than Gutenberg, and it's happening faster, right? The shift to print really changed how human beings learned, but it was a shift that happened, from 1500 to 1700. This is happening from 2000 to 2020. So we're living right in the middle of this explosion of innovation in learning. And you saw some really cool examples of it this morning. So when I talk about the shift to personal digital learning, I'm not just talking about the shift from print to digital. I'm talking about a really thick shift in the way learning happens, particularly the way learning institutions happen. So here's 6 things that are beginning to shift, and you heard examples of them this morning. The shift from age cohorts to individual students moving as they show what they know. We're seeing a shift from print, which is flat and sequential, sort of a one-way slog to knowledge, to learning materials that are adaptive and engaging. Adaptive meaning they automatically adjust to your level. And very soon they're going to start to adjust to your modality, the best way that you learn. We're shifting from end-of-year paper and pencil test to instant feedback, like games. We're shifting from tethered to mobile, from the individual practice to teaching in teams. And as Marcy said, we're shifting from this notion of education as a place to learning as a service, and one that's tailored for every single student. So when I think about all of those, the changes, I think about 3 big benefits of personal digital learning. Customization, meaning a customized path for every student. Motivation, new ways to engage and sustain persistence among young people. And then equalization, the potential, the power of giving every student a connected take-home device, and what that will mean for every family of having 24/7, 365 access to learning opportunities. So let me just stop there and just ask you what you're excited about when it comes to this shift to personal digital learning that's happening right now, right in Columbus. What are you excited about? Anything you saw this morning that was cool? Yes.
I'm excited. I was really excited about just the focus on meeting the children where they are,
Yeah.
and being able to customize their learning so that they will be successful. And that was key. What's the end result? And the end result, we want success for all of our children,
Yeah.
to be able to be prepared for our workforce as well as quality of life for them.
So meeting kids where they are, right? We built a system that's the best we could. We sort of inherited from the Prussians 100 years ago, and we organized kids by birthday, and they, right? We batch process them through the system, and some get it and some don't. But it was sort of the best that we could figure out how to do, right? And now, like this morning, you saw some really cool examples of software products that meet kids right where they are, that in a few questions can figure out exactly their learning level, right? And we're starting to build schools where teachers can meet kids where they are. I'll tell you a quick story about the School of One on this subject. So School of One uses a lot of really cool software, and I love it. But here's my favorite meet kids where they are story. So there's like 5 different stations in this 6th grade math classroom. And the station right here in the foreground is a small group instruction. But here's the magical thing about the small group instruction. There are 6 kids at that table, and there's a teacher who prepared a lesson the night before. And here's the magic part. She knew that every student would be ready for that lesson on that day in that modality. Right? That's magic. Because they combined, you're studying logistics, they have this algorithm that combines dynamic scheduling with adaptive software, right? So every kid has demonstrated through prior assessments that they're ready at this level and that they do really well in small group instruction. So think, if you're a teacher, think about how magical that is to be able to get ready the night before to teach a small group who is prepared to succeed in the modality that you'll be delivering in and the lesson that you've prepared. Right? That's really magical, right? So this is very cool for teachers as well as kids, but the potential to actually customize a sequence of learning experiences for every student is right around the corner, right? And it's beginning to happen at some of the schools that you heard about this morning.
I
Yes.
was excited too.
Oh,
No, go ahead.
okay, thank you. A couple of things. One is the mastery of the subject,
Right.
Without a stigma seeming to be attached
Right.
to it. So if you're not where your cohorts are, that you're
Right.
moving along at your own
and
pace, but it's within the norm as opposed
And the
to
old way we dealt with that was retention, right?
Right.
Where you had to repeat, but that meant do the same grade the same way that you failed at the first time. right? So it was well-intentioned, right? Because it's dumb to move kids on before they're ready, right? But the treatment was like leeches and bleeding, right? It was really, really crude. So this potential of creating schools where kids that need more time get more time, right? Eric, you were talking about this, right? You have a kid that occasionally needs more time, right? And that makes so much sense. It's hard to do in a regular school, right? You had another one on your list.
The other one was how to fully utilize community resources to benefit the student. So, beyond the structural walls, there are other structural assets,
right?
And human assets to tap into.
Yeah. Was it Marcy or Amy that talked about, you talked about flex models. I think Amy mentioned flex models. These flex model schools are really easy because you have a digital curriculum, so the school can meet anywhere, anytime. So you can attach it to community resources, right? So if you have a really cool museum, or you have a Boys and Girls Club, or you have a traveling soccer team, they can all become a school, right? You give the kids a laptop and they're at school, right? So this change in mindset from, as Marcy said, not thinking about school as a place, but it's a customized set of services for a kid. Do you have another one on your list? Okay. What are you excited about?
Well, I'm excited, and I don't want to sound confrontational, but I'm excited that there was no cowards in the room today. They were all able to say that all kids can learn, and you just don't hear that all the time. And I need that in my kid's life. So I was excited about that.
Yeah. No, that's where it starts, right? Mm-hmm. What else are you excited about that you heard or didn't hear about? Yes?
Re-engagement, both of the student and of the teacher. This idea of the flipped class and where the valuable learning is taking place. Those are very exciting.
The big problem that we're dealing with is for most kids, school is just really boring.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's really awful. If you visit a lot of algebra classes, and you sit in the back of the class, you go, it makes me cringe. It's like they're really just bad. They're really boring. And the cool thing, you heard examples of it. There's no excuse for that anymore. I mean, there's one of the companies that I invested in is called Manga High. It's in London. It's middle grade math games, and these are very cool. And these are not like some math games are like a personal shooter game, and then you stop and do algebra, and then you go back to killing people. This is not that. These games are actually built around the mechanics of mathematics, right? So the interest is in how do we engage kids around the mechanics of mathematical thinking, right? ST Math from Mind Research Institute is another example. They have a collection of 900 visual math games. They're like math puzzles, and you can walk through these 900 games from pre-kindergarten to pre-algebra without a word of English. It's interesting. So for kids that really struggle with the English language or are really visual learners, which is like 60% of our kids, these games are really cool. So they're very engaging. They teach understanding or critical thinking better. So.
I just, and it's really back to where kids are and their interest in technology. I have a 2-year-old grandson who is on his iPad all the time learning math and reading. So then we stop that, when they go to kindergarten, first grade, and go back to this traditional class.
It's crazy.
Generations. So
it's crazy.
Need to be there.
Now, but to sort of defend our schools for about 33 seconds, this stuff is like 2 years old, right? The iPads came out in 2010, and now suddenly there's like 40,000 learning apps, right? And yes, the 2 and 3-year-olds are all over this stuff, but it takes us old people a little bit longer. But it's time, right? And that's why you have this commission. It's time to plan for something different.
So if I pile on there, I was struck by not only this morning's conversation, last week's conversation we had with Sebastian Thrun, and Sebastian, observed that maybe Angry Birds is one of the best online physics teaching tool.
Absolutely.
That totally inspires. Everybody goes to bed excited, even when they didn't go to the next level.
They're doing trajectories, right? It's physics. They're doing vectors, for God's sakes, right?
So, but here's the observation that I struggle with. And I agree with your rapid innovation. It's happening. It's right in front of us. We're right in the middle of it. the sailing magnates didn't invent the steamship, and the cart and buggies didn't invent the automobile, and the railroads didn't invent the airplanes. Time and time again, history has proven that institutions and organizations and industries can't reinvent themselves. And with disruptive technology, what I struggle with is we are forcing technology into a centuries-old and broken model that doesn't reflect, my teenage kids' habits of communication. And I wonder, whether it's a futile exercise, important, but futile exercise to try to adapt as opposed to hit the reset button and start over, given the lessons of history.
Yeah, so that's really the subject of the hour that we're going to spend together talking about what I would call a portfolio approach, because I think you're mostly right. So I think I think the elementary school model is recoverable. It's redeemable. We can update the elementary model, and we're seeing a lot of good examples of that. I think it's harder to fix and create a great public high school out of the current model that we have. So what we'll come back and talk about is...
And if I take it a step further, I think this campus is dead over the next century because
clearly.
I don't think that it will exist in the future.
But if we draw a line from K to 16, right, it's... I think having a supportive environment, the custodial aspect of school is much more important at the elementary level than it is in high school and certainly in college, right? So this shift from place to service happened in higher ed with the advent of online learning. We're going to see very blended institutions at the high school level. I think most elementary kids are still going to experience education as a place, right? So I think the answer is slightly different depending on the level. But what we just lived through in 2012 with this explosion of MOOCs, all this free online higher ed, it's now really, really true that anybody in the world with a broadband connection can learn anything for free, right? So if you're running an institution of higher ed like this one, you should be very, very afraid. Now, places like Ohio State, R1s, will be able to coast for a while. But if you're running a third-tier institution, right, and if you can take a course on Udacity, or you can go to edX and get the best profs at Harvard and MIT. That's like the game changed last year, right? So more on the implications for Columbus strategy in a couple of minutes. Anything else that you're excited about? Yes.
Somebody else want to say something? Because I don't want to hold the mic. I mean, I do, but I don't want to. The other thing that excited me was that, to elaborate on what I said earlier, is some of the conversations that I've heard in low-performing schools is, oh my goodness, we need to form partnerships, or we need to try to get some resources out of our community. And I didn't hear anything like that from them. They went and got those resources. They formed those partnerships, and they made it happen. And so then they end up having a success story. And so I'm hoping that that we can come up with recommendations that will forge attitudes like that across the border.
This morning you saw some really great examples of it. Does start with leadership, and leadership starts with a set of expectations about what's possible and about using resources and partnerships wisely. And you saw really, really good examples of that today. Yes?
Just sort of a comment on what's changing. And we have this extraordinary challenge to, as you said, make these changes, and they may be different at different levels.
Right.
But I think if we can find a way to frame, this goes back to the question of, is change, do people fear change or do they fear loss?
Right.
And if we can reframe that, and I even think about it, from the perspective of a teacher, we heard a teacher tell us that experience was completely changed in a positive sense
Right.
by blending, by the use of technology and reframing their role.
Right.
So, my observation, even from my work, is that we have a generation of people gathering data from all over the place, and the powerful experience. So that's new, that's incredible, and that's this transformational thing.
Right.
The question is then organizing that and thinking about that and strategizing around it and using that is a new role.
Right.
And so the question for me is whether that, instead of framing that as loss for someone saying, I used to have this power, now I don't, as a teacher, now I'm doing that completely differently. And I
Right.
think there's an incredibly powerful opportunity for us to reframe the way we think of that, and it can be threatening and it can be an opportunity.
So Marcy talked about a couple different blended learning models, and one of the things I'm excited about is not only because we can meet kids where they are and do a better job of meeting their needs, we can create working conditions for teachers that are much better, and we can create much better career opportunities for teachers. I mean, right now the job is really hard. And you have a lot of people that were like me that were superintendents that would hire young people and put them in the worst assignments in our district with very little support, right? Toughest kids, worst classrooms, really no scaffolding around them, right? So now the alternatives, we can hire teachers into a team, led by a master teacher with a lot of support. We can give them a lot more data. We can give them much more sophisticated tools, and we can show them a career path where they can, if they're interested in it, they can advance much more rapidly. Right? So now instead of you start at 35,000 and you can stay on the job for 25 years and max out at 65,000. Right? Now you could say to a young person, you start at 40 and you can go to 80 in 5 years with this sort of demonstrated leadership and performance. Right? So we can create better working conditions and better career opportunities with these new school models. So I think it's a really exciting time for educators, but it is on us to make the case that things can get better for them and their kids. Yes?
So very excited about what I heard this morning, but many times I sort of leap ahead. So the concerns about our children who don't have access to.
Right.
So Tanny talked about her 2-year-old grandchild with the iPad or whatever. I went shopping in Christmas. I adopted a family. The mother wanted a developmental toy. She had a 3-year-old, and I think it's called Leapfrog or whatever it is. I gave those gifts several years ago. I didn't need to be concerned about the internet access. So when I read the box, I called the agency where this family is, well, Ms. Jackson, we don't have that kind of access. So the toy that I wanted to give and what's out there for many of our kids, this 3-year-old couldn't have. So I'm just wondering, again,
Right.
down the road around the capacity currently, which I think we might be, I won't say easy to fix within the schools,
Right.
but making sure that all children have that capacity. Because in our last session, we talked about the poverty, certainly in our community.
Right.
And again, making sure that we don't have that digital divide for all of our kids.
Right. So that's great. And we'll spend 15 minutes just trying to surface some of the things that you're worried about now. But let's start with the divide. So the solution to the divide is commissions like this one, right? I think it's really important that you work with the city and the state and say, it's time for us to lead. And you have to do like Florida did and say, by 2015, we're going to use predominantly digital instructional materials. So just putting a flag in the ground was a really important planning event. And it just so happens that in 2015, we will be administering online tests in Ohio and in most states around the country. So it happens to be a year that's an important sort of a pivot point. So I think if you as a commission adopted that as one of your recommendations, that by 2015, we'd like to see the schools using predominantly digital instructional material. We'd also like to see that be a goal for all students having some kind of a connected take-home learning device. And then another thing that the city can do with the district and with broadband providers is to make sure that there's really good access to broadband, high levels of service, very affordable prices, and that you have great connections at school and good access to every home in the city. So that's something that the city can make a big difference on. Last night, a couple of us, Marcy and Amy and I, were talking about what high access environments will look like in 2015-16, and I encourage people to think about a 3-screen day. A lot of you probably learn and work in a 3-screen day, where you spend part of your day on a small screen, you spend part of your day on a production screen, you spend part of your day on a sharing screen. And I'd like to see most kids spending most of their time in that sort of 3-screen experience, where they're doing some learning on a small screen, they're doing some production, particularly writing, every day on a production screen, and then when they go to school, there's a video monitor, or there's a smart board where they can share and collaborate with other students. Schools can't afford to buy 3 screens for every kid. So my sense is that schools ought to provide the production screen, because that will be useful for the state online tests, but that we should be encouraging kids to bring their own device, BYOD, to sort of top off the equity layer that schools provide. So on this front, at the very end, I'm going to highlight a couple resources, and I wrote a paper 2 months ago called Funding the Shift, and it describes the decision about what device you pick and who should pay for it. And it's available at digitallearningnow.com, or it's available on my site, gettingsmart.com, under resources. So there's good resources for communities thinking about how to improve access. So what else are you worried about when it comes to this digital learning stuff? You have one on your list. I know you do.
I'm with Janet. Some kids don't have access, and then there's so many schools that I know of that don't have a smart board, and they're sharing them with 6
Right.
other rooms. So if that becomes the number one way to teach our kids, what happens with the kids that don't have access or can't take it home, or how are we going to solve
so
that? So
our schools have to make a plan over the next 3 years and phase it in. You don't have to do it all at once, but there's no excuse for not adopting and phasing in a school model that by 2015 or 16 has very good access and includes a take-home device for every kid. It's very affordable. It's cheaper to give kids a tablet than a backpack full of books. I mean, it's very doable. It just requires some leadership, and it requires a phased change in a budget allocation. But I did a one-to-one program in all my secondary schools in 1995, when laptops were this big and weighed 20 pounds and cost $2,500. So it was really hard. But a year ago, we passed this threshold of about $250 per kid per year. It's sort of total cost of ownership. And I think at that point, whether it's laptops or netbooks or tablets, it's now very affordable, particularly if a district uses some open content to offset the cost. So you're not paying so much for content. You can afford to pay a little bit more for a device. This is very affordable. In that paper, Funding the Shift, there are some great examples of districts that in just 3 years have made the transformation. There's a new book that came out this month by Mark Edwards from Mooresville, North Carolina, that talks about their 4-year transformation to being one of the best sort of one-to-one school districts in the country. So it does take leadership, but it's very, very doable. Eric?
I'll worry for everybody.
Yeah.
That's partly my job, I guess. So I'm worried about 2 interrelated issues. One is that there's so much out there that it's hard to know what's good and what's not good.
Right.
And everybody's going to be using, different tools and different software programs, and we all think whatever ours is the best. But proving the efficacy of them and really, sifting through good and bad,
I'm not sure how we do that. And related to that is that there's something we're using that we like, and just like a textbook, it becomes obsolete.
Right.
But at least with the textbook world, the publisher calls us and tells us they have a new edition and they've updated it.
Right.
And in some ways, that's why it's easy, right? Because we buy the updated version, and at least we know that the information then is current in it. And how do we know that we're using the most current or the most efficacious materials?
No, those are great questions. Marcy, do you want to take a stab at how do we figure out what to use? Yeah, jump up there and grab that one, just because I think it's a good question. You guys, your blended learning slide showed a little constellation of the stuff that you used, Dreambox and ST Math, and how did you come to that decision? What was that process look like? How did it differ than the old textbook adoption?
So I do have to say that Metro is brilliant at it. So I learned a lot from Metro while I was there. But one of the things that is really important is that we have this rapid fail culture, that we take something at first and try it. And when I say try it, we don't just look at it like have a couple teachers look at it and see if maybe they think it might work. We have kids try it. We pilot it. Metro piloted Teams on Udacity in about a month, right? So we wanted to make sure that we were doing something that made a difference and had the highest quality standards available, that had as much interactivity as possible. And now I'm looking at trying to find things that are the most adaptive. So you set your criteria of what you want this thing to do, whatever this thing is, and you first look for the ones that are free, because we all like free. And then once you have some connectivity, so like when we look at High Tech High, what are they using and why are they using it? And what are they getting as a result of using it? Survey the landscape of who's actually using what, and make sure that you know whether or not that's going to fulfill the opportunity that you need to fulfill. And then make sure that you rapidly deploy it with kids. It will not work if we just take things to adults and say, oh, I think this would work, because we don't think the same way. We weren't brought up in the same kind of digital environment that our kids in school are being exposed to. So I think that if you take a rapid prototyping and rapid fail approach to it, don't invest too much until you know if it's going to meet the niche at that time. Right. And then once it does, go after it hard and fast.
Thanks. That's a great answer. And I'm going to add a sort of a note for grandmothers and parents and thinking about iPad apps.
Right.
There's Common Sense Media is a group that is rating early education apps for kids. But it's hard to make sense of all this, right? There's 40,000 apps out there. It's hard to find them and know what works. So use the rating services that exist, like Common Sense. EdSurge is looking at K-12 products. There's a few crowdsourced, trying to do a Yelp for ed apps, and then this sort of a rapid trial feedback kind of system. But it's a good question, and it's one that we're going to struggle with for a really long time. Yes?
Tom, one consideration would be, so if we put the tools in the students' hands, are we equally investing in the teachers, not just with the tools, but with the obviously professional development that they might need? So if you've got somebody that's been in the classroom for an extended period of time, trying to keep up with young people on technology is a bit of a challenge. Right. But also, how do we push that to the colleges of education? So it's not just the school district, trying to bring their people up to speed, but new teachers are coming out ready for this new environment. So on the PD, it's a great point. You can't do enough of it. But the exciting thing is that personalized learning is not just for kids, it's for teachers. So we need to make sure that every teacher has an individual learning plan. And that part of that learning plan is learning with their team and their school, but part of that is an online learning plan for them. And there are one of the companies that I support is called Bloomboard, and it's a free teacher observation and a free a teacher learning plan where every teacher can have an individualized learning plan and then access to a market of PD resources. So we do need to make it a priority to create learning opportunities for teachers. Yes?
Hi, this is a little bit of a corollary, I think, to Chad's Chad's question, but
I forgot to dump on ed schools. I'm going to come back and do that in just a
but,
minute.
something that
I don't want to let them skate. They're awful.
Again, all of this looks great, but I wanted to ask: are there any concerns, or at least my concern would be, is there anything we're losing that we lose in focusing so so almost singularly on technology as the tool to learning, and I guess
that's
I look
the right
at things
question,
like personal development, social development, mores, value systems. Marcy and I are buddies. I was also looking for her to have input on that. But is that something that comes up in your discussions or your considerations?
You want to keep asking that question, right? Because the answer is yes. There are things that we could lose if we're not smart, if we don't have the right priorities, and if we don't keep asking that question. One of the things you'll hear me say is I think flex models at the high school are really important, and I think you ought to open 6 in Columbus in September. You just there's one called Nexus that was opened here with Connections Academy. I'm on the board of Advanced Path. They run these dropout prevention academies all over the country. You ought to have 6 of these flex academies this fall that demonstrate online individualized high school experience. That said, I have visited some of those where I see kids racing through these sort of mindless lessons and taking a little multiple choice quiz at the end and then moving on to the next thing. And it makes me cringe because it's like, that's not the sort of deeper learning that I really want. There's no integration, there's no application, and there's really it's not the social context that I'd like to see, right? So, but it doesn't have to be that way. So I think if as we're thinking about new schools and thinking about school improvement strategies, if we say high level of knowledge and skills is really important, and the guy from Southwestern had a beautiful set of goals, right? So his board had given him the mantle of a set of goals that not only include you can read and write at a high level, right, but that you can communicate, that you can work in a team, right, that you can think deeply about the challenges that the world faces, right? So if you embrace those kinds of goals and keep asking yourself, are we creating learning experiences where kids are really getting what we most want, then you'll get that. But it's quite possible to create environments that are, not richer experiences and don't have the sort of social learning aspect that we want. So it's a great question. Was there one more? Yes.
Yeah, my question was the same as Attorney Rancier's in a sense. I remember us, and maybe I'm dating myself, when we were going to move into the metric system.
Oh.
I heard a Presbyterian minister say we're inching our way into it. I think that there's no question that technology is here and it's here to stay. But I do think that we have to be extremely cautious about going headlong into any direction. And I do think that the question in terms of socialization, well, we want to really educate our children totally, not just partially, but totally. And, for them to be doing well in math and reading and science, that's wonderful. But we don't want them to be deficient in other areas that are just as important,
right,
in their social life. And I think that part I haven't heard anything about.
No, I agree.
And I think that's an area that we just simply, we have to look at the total person.
Right.
Schools like Harvard now, they're not just interested in kids who can make A's.
Right.
They're interested in their contributions in their community. The athletic.
I think this morning you saw examples of schools that really value the whole child development. Marcy and Amy, Greg, they all talked about an environment that really embraces that philosophy. So I appreciate that. The other speakers did. It's about getting your goals right. So let me give you. Let's do about 10 minutes on what I call portfolio strategy, which is my recommendation to you for the way forward, to think about sort of a framework for over the next 3 to 5 years. How do you make things dramatically better for most kids in Cleveland, and in Cleveland too, but in Columbus. Cleveland needs help too.
You liked my music too, right?
Yes. And it's interesting that, speaking of Ohio cities, this portfolio approach is something that Steve Adamowski in Cincinnati really taught me. When I visited him first in 1999, and I walked into his office, and he had this picture on his wall of the school's performance in his city defined the relationship that he had with them. And some of them were really bad and were on the list to be closed. And some were really struggling and were on the list to get a lot of help. And some only needed a little bit of help. And some were fantastic and should be replicated and rewarded. And that was right there for everybody to see. It was in the newspaper. You know, your school's relationship determined the kind of relationship you're going to have with Steve. And Steve, I think, really laid the groundwork for what is now the most common and productive urban approach to improvement. And so I want to say just a couple words about this. I think as we've talked about, it starts with high expectations, then having a sound portfolio strategy, and then on top of that, sort of phasing in, moving from low access to high access over the course of the next 3 years. So first of all, building support for high expectations. So as a commission, as a city, as a group of partners that care about kids' education, every person in this room can play a role in creating high expectations for kids and reinforcing why that's important. You can help do that at school. You can do it after school. You can help give schools examples of why high expectations are important. We're about ready to go through a really, really tough period of time. Kentucky showed us what it will look like. They gave tests that were benchmarked at the Common Core level, and their proficiency rates were cut in basically in half. And some version of that's going to happen here. So one job for this commission, for community partners that care about the education of kids in this town, is to be ready to stand firm on high expectations for all kids, that it really does matter that kids in this town be able to read at a high level, to be able to write well, to be able to attack, complicated multivariable problems. These are important things, and next year and the year after that, it's going to be important for each of you to stand up and say that. Your schools will need your support on that front. Second, here's the formula for a portfolio strategy. In short, as Steve showed us in Cincinnati, there's a few schools that are just too hard to fix. And at the Gates Foundation, I invested about $4 billion, half of that on K-12 schools, about half of that trying to fix bad high schools, including a lot here in Ohio. And the lesson is it's really hard. It is really hard to fix a bad high school. Everything about a failing high school needs to change, and it's very, very difficult to do. And so the tough lesson of the last 10 years is that there are some schools that you should just close. Now, that's not a lot. It might be 5%, but there are some that you're better off closing and replacing than trying to fix. The vast majority, you need a really good plan of improvement. And you have really good examples around you. Reynoldsburg and Southwestern are tangible examples of schools that have made big improvements. Cincinnati dramatically increased its graduation rates. Kansas City, Kansas, went from about 60% to 90% over the course of 5 or 6 years. So there are good examples of districts that have faced high challenge, that have significantly improved graduation rates and achievement levels. The opportunity now is to inject digital learning strategies into those sort of tried and true methods. Houston is another city that has a really robust school improvement effort for its lowest performing schools. So there are good examples around the country. The third part of a portfolio strategy is to open new schools and to be aggressive about that. New York City, New Orleans, Denver, Detroit, those are all examples of places that are, Indianapolis, they're cities that are aggressively opening new schools. And with online learning, it's making it much easier to open new schools quickly. And then on top of that, there's this new opportunity to create a layer of digital learning opportunities, both formal and informal, to make it easier for kids to learn anywhere, anytime, to have choice down to the course level. Here's a quick picture of what that might look like and sort of the rough level of effort that I would put against each one of those. So, starting at the bottom, closing failing schools where it's just going to be too hard to fix. That's probably 5% of the level of effort. The big chunk of the effort really goes into improving existing schools, and I think it's important to do that in networks where those schools are working with a support structure. It might be the district, but it might also be an external partner. So those 3 green blocks might be 3 different improvement networks where groups of schools are working with an intermediary organization. What's the Knowledge Works subsidiary called that does school improvement? Harold's? EdWorks? So EdWorks might be one of those. And back to the question of ed schools, they're not good. They're getting more and more irrelevant every year. And when you look at this chart, what that suggests is you already have quite a few choices in Columbus. If you take this strategy, you'll have twice as many choices 5 years from now. And as a result, these environments are very different to teach in. Even the panel that you saw this morning, right? It's very different to teach at Graham than it is at Metro, than it is in Southwestern, than it is in Reynoldsburg. And so what that tells me is that we need more customized pathways where a bigger chunk of preparation is linked to the model where the teacher is working or will be working, right? Because it's so different to work in one environment. So a generic program of theory-based preparation becomes less and less relevant as school models become more and more differentiated. So I think you have to circle once the city sort of adopts a strategy, you have to circle back and say, how do we prepare? How do we support existing teachers, and how do we prepare future teachers, given the vision of where we'd like to be 3 or 4 years from now? Let me just stop and see if there's a question or a comment about this basic framework of close bad schools, support struggling schools, start new schools. Is that? Yes? No? Concerns? You had one lady in your video said, you already got too many choices. This is going to screw up neighborhood schools. Right? That's...
The question about, closing failing schools.
Right.
Because someone
it's awful. You don't want to be on the school board that year. Right?
Well, it's interesting because if you think about a failing school, what makes up a failing school? Because right. Someone could say, well, is it, the students, and the students are there and they have, so many issues and concerns that right. It's making it difficult to learn? Right. Is it that we have the teachers who aren't able to teach to the individualized student? Yes. Is it the location where the school happens to be?
Right.
Or is it all the other issues that, besides the learning, but all the other outside issues that children come to school with that we don't know how to handle that? I mean, so you're talking about a failing school.
Right.
That's the first question. Why is it failing? And then, I guess, those same students, though, have to go to either the new schools or go to where there's a struggling school.
That's
so
great.
That's an issue that I know will come up, and just want to know how you have dealt with that issue or how people have dealt with it.
It's a great, they're a really important set of concerns, right? So to the first issue, when you evaluate a school's potential to improve, you have to look at a broad dashboard. You have to look at academic results and financial results. You have to look at the staffing. You have to look at the community conditions, right? How are kids coming to school? So you have to make sure you understand it really well, and it's not just a toggle, right? Secondly, you do have to consider where those kids are going to go. In New York City, where you have a subway system, it can be really fluid, where you can close a school and be opening schools, and because there's so much choice within the city, you don't have to worry quite so much about pairing, phasing one down and phasing one up, right? But in a system with a history of neighborhood schools, you really have to sweat those details to make sure that every neighborhood is served by a good school. So that might mean a phasing down, phasing up kind of a strategy. These are really important because most charter operators love to hang on to this old notion of open a school a grade at a time, right? Because you can really build the culture of a place if you start it really small and just grow it a little bit every year. But that means an elementary school is not at full enrollment, often for 5 or 6 years. Well, you can't do that if you're closing a school and opening a school, right? So you do have to match these strategies up carefully so that my goal, if you adopted a portfolio strategy goal, I would suggest the goal be, we want to fulfill the good school promise, that we're going to start with the premise that every family ought to have access to a good neighborhood school, number one. And on top of that, we want to give them at least one other option and a good virtual option. So if that was the goal, right, you start with a set of well-stated goals, as a number of you have described, what it means to be an educated human being. And then to do that, we want a good neighborhood school, a good school of choice, and good full and part-time learning options on top of that. Now let's build a plan for how you might get there. That's not easy, but I think it's doable.
I have a question.
Yes. But it does sort of imply a system of managed choice, right? So for this really to work well, it helps if the district embraces this strategy and is part of it, right? So that you can coordinate if a district school is closing and you're opening a charter school, right? So that you really can have a coordinated set of options that are rational, right? So it's clearly harder to do in an oppositional situation where you've got some members of the community interested in options and others that are not.
So we have to have the options ready. So once we get ready to close the school, understanding why these issues are there, then we have to be prepared for those, like the 3 options that you just mentioned for those young people.
It's worth noting that you're lousy in Ohio at closing bad charter schools, right? And the promise of charter schools was the good ones get renewed and the bad ones don't, right? And it's hard to close struggling schools, right? We know that. So even the charters are not, we're not turning off the ones that aren't doing as well as they should be. And so it does mean you have to have a system that's pretty disciplined about accountability. Is there another comment?
I think Alex was next.
Go ahead.
You sure? Okay. I guess my question is, what does that look like under your plan? Closing a school, where does the funding come from? When you're closing the school, are you opening a brand new school? Are you because you're saying open a school, another school, but is that a new building? Because that's a lot of funding, and so what does that look like in your plan?
Yeah, the answer is it depends. So we can follow up and do this offline and go through a bunch of examples, but the cities that have done this, I mean, starting with Cincinnati, they would schedule one to close, so they might say now at the end of the year it's going to close, but a new school is going to open there in September. Right, so they would coordinate use of that same building, but they would sort of separate owning the building from who's operating the school. So you can coordinate these efforts. Eric? Okay. All right. There are great examples around the country of cities that have really good success opening new schools. I helped to fund at the Gates Foundation about 400 new schools in New York City. It's dramatically helped increase their graduation rates. New Orleans is now a collection of mostly new, very good schools. Denver's a very good example. Indianapolis is a good example. All of these cities, the last few in particular, have really attracted interesting school developers into their town. Miami is a good example of a city where the school district embraced this sort of flex model. So now there's a school within a school at each of the big high schools where kids can, called iPrep, and kids can study on their own in a highly supportive environment. You could the district could open an iPrep-like academy in every one of the high schools in the fall to give kids a range of options. You could use it as a upper division strategy to create access to AP and STEM and dual enrollment. You could use it as a dropout prevention academy to make sure that kids are struggling, have a supportive alternative. So there's lots of good examples. I think given how fast things are changing, it's important for families to have access to better options, but it's also important for staff members to be able to have places they can go visit, so that there's more places like Metro, that there's more places like Reynoldsburg, that more experiential schools like Graham, where they can go see how things work very differently. The Center for Reinventing Public Education at the University of Washington is really a great resource on this front. Yes?
Sorry. I think this is a fascinating discussion today and really encouraging for the future. If current school systems are a creation of the 20th century, what do we need to rebrand the concept of schooling before we think about closing schools? How can we motivate parents to value education, to follow their children's education? How do we motivate teachers to invest in the clientele that they have in their classrooms, that these are products for future society? How do you motivate students to think that high school diploma is a gateway to a good future? Going to college, it opens up doors.
Right.
So the question for me, it's more about branding and creating a product that students and families are able to buy from educators and from communities than it is to continue doing what we know is not working.
It's a great comment. I think you heard from a couple of the examples here of community leaders that started with high expectations and then connected to youth and family services. So that is something that this commission really can do. You can support high expectations. You can sort of get behind the idea of what real employability looks like, what civic engagement should look like for every student. So I think sort of changing the conversation about education, about connecting kids and families to quality services is something that you can do while all this work is happening. So you saw a good example of it at Southwestern this morning. I wrote a blog Monday about Baltimore, about a kid who left the best district school and took over a rec center next door that the city had closed. And he's now running daytime programs, after-school programs, and evening programs for his community that are super relevant to the new jobs in Baltimore, right? And I think it's amazing that one teacher who got ticked off at the city doing something stupid and at the district for moving so slow has really changed the conversation in Baltimore. So for me, it's an example of how one person really can make a big difference, or at least change the conversation in a community.
Commissioners, we're going to move to the next stage of this afternoon's presentations. We're going to ask Tom, will you please stay with the rest of and join our panel members? But before I have Eric to introduce the panel members, I'd like to acknowledge Michael Collins, who was elected member of the Ohio State Board of Education, representing most of Columbus, and ask him to please stand to be acknowledged. It's yours, Eric.
Thank you. Pankaj and Stu, if you come on up. So what we're going to do, and thank you, Madam Chair, for asking Tom to stay, because his terrific insights, I know, are engaging us all, and we don't want to lose it. But I said to you this morning that we knew we couldn't have a discussion about the potential of technology without addressing the so-called digital divide. And I promised you we would get to it today, and you couldn't wait. It was clear that this was on your mind. Right away, you jumped in and started asking Tom about it. And Tom is very knowledgeable on it. We want to keep him here. But we also wanted to give you some baseline information about digital access in Columbus and opportunities in the state of Ohio so that we can inform that conversation. And I'm going to just preview this a little bit to say that I think what we're going to hear is we have good opportunities, but we have gaps. And as Tom said to you earlier today, this is an opportunity for this commission to not allow infrastructure to stand us in the way of doing what's right to create this digital layer that Tom spoke about. I love his phrase, a digital layer. I think it's a really terrific phrase that helps me understand it. And we're not going to let infrastructure stand in our way, but we got to confront that openly and honestly. And if there's any subject that this commission, I'm confident, can help us find a strategy and a way forward, it's to close the gaps in that digital infrastructure. You all gasped when we showed you the chart this morning that Rhonda Johnson provided us, that 90% of the teachers are frustrated and find that this costs them time and they lose time on technological issues. And we will give Rhonda a chance to get it off her chest, because I know what a challenge this is, and how frustrating it is for teachers who want to do the right thing. I'll introduce them by saying I was recently at a program, and I heard a terrific speaker who made a comment about teachers. Said, that we always worry, are teachers able to adapt to these new technologies? And the point that this speaker made was that very soon we're going to enter the generation of teachers who are digital natives, right? So the teachers who are graduating from this university, who are going to be teaching in our school, grew up in the internet age. They grew up with mobile devices. They grew up, they went to college with iPads. They did. So this notion, this generation of the dinosaurs who had to learn is retiring. And so now, when we have teachers who know how to do it, want to do it, will be engaged to do it, it becomes even more important that we are able to provide the infrastructure. The expectations that we have in our own jobs of tools that we can use to do our jobs is no less important, indeed more important probably, in the jobs that our teachers and principals do. So I asked Pankaj Shah if he would join us. Pankaj runs Ornet, which is our state broadband network, and is expanding that broadband network all the time. It started as a university-based project, but has now expanded. And Pankaj will share a little bit about what exists in Ohio from a digital network basis. And then Stu Johnson, who is with Connect Ohio, whose mission is to do exactly what we're discussing here, which is get that last mile done, right? How do we get the digital networks out? I've asked them to be really brief so that we can get the basic facts, but then we can re-engage Tom in the conversation and all of us talk together. Again, this is a subject I know there's expertise on the commission, and in the last hour we have together, I want to make sure we tap into the expertise we all have. So Pankaj.
Thank you, Eric, and it's a privilege to be presenting to you, all the commissioners. So I'll be quick. There are slides and you have the handouts. But just to give you the lay of the land, I think many of you know this, it's been well publicized, but we can be proud to say Ohio has one of the fastest backbone, if I may call in that terminology, of the geek. So we have enough fiber and enough speed that is connecting, as Eric mentioned, all of our universities to begin with, but all of the K-12, all of the healthcare, medical facilities connected to our colleges, state and local government and public broadcasting stations. Those are our key anchors on this backbone. Recently, as you know, we had funding after we had a project that was well aligned with the country, Internet 2's mission. So this brought us tenfold bandwidth increase. So from the 10 gig backbone that we had, this is 100 gig. And so for just relevance sake, this is our highways, right? These are the interstates, if you may. These are not the last mile connections to the school buildings that we will want to talk about, and Stu will bring light to it. But this is the backbone where all of the traffic aggregates. Going back to this particular program that we had when Eric was a chancellor at that point, we had an opportunity and we made full use of it by influxing about $150 million of the federal program through the BTOP funds. And so the three colors that you see there are three different telecom and cable and a not-for-profit coming together with ORNet to expand the broadband connectivity into the communities. This program basically is on, and I think it's funded until June of this year, when we will know how much of the footprint that they have advanced themselves into. And as an integral connection into ORNet, it basically bridges the gap between east, west, north, south of Ohio and brings connectivity within the state to that last mile the best we can as it projects out. So coming back directly with the schools, right, and especially with Columbus, you can see that the school districts are all connected to our backbone, and especially the metropolitan schools are very well connected. Columbus School themselves, City of Columbus is connected directly to our backbone as well for other services that we work with them on. And of course, this is funded by Department of Education. Through their fundings, they fund the ITCs, which are the aggregation points which come back to ORNet. So this is what happens when you connect to a research and education network. It's different from what we generally do when we are connecting to our other private providers, our partners, who take you to the normal, if I may call, commodity internet for Google, for films, for Netflix, and all of that. This network that you see is a conglomeration of all the state networks, such as ORNet. 32 states connect into this backbone. This is the backbone which got upgraded to 100 gig. So we followed very soon and finished ours right in line with them. This takes the school districts, it gives the school districts, in the next few slides I'll show you some of the applications and some of the programs that they share already. And we have access today to this. So this is nothing new, but it's just kind of reiterating and making sure you have this in your docket as you plan the good things for the Columbus schools here. So connectivity, content, and collaboration. These are the themes for K-12 globally within our country, and this is how higher education has stepped up and kind of held the hands of K-12 and said, we have this network, but you can make use of it. So there is a whole council that sits and talks about this at a national level, about connectivity, and everything is listed, the different ideas and functions and different communities that connect into. And so what are the advantages? Well, just to give you one, I don't want to go into details, but if you look at the third bullet there, you will see there is an interactive video conference. If you come to our offices sometime in October and look at it, we have like a 24 or a 48-hour session going across the globe. You can see dances from China, a science presentation from India, a space presentation from Korea. It just goes around every school that participates, and I think about 128 schools from different countries and continents participate. This started here in Ohio. We were the prime runners of this conference, saying, how can we enhance learning through collaboration? So our schools here have access to this. They can participate in a world forum. Staff development. Along with this came, Ornet has been in the business of video conferencing since 1999. What we are seeing today, we used to do that as research on our activities. We help Polycoms and other derive the new H.323 standards. It's all well documented how that happens. So what we have available to all the students today are these rich resources of shared services, e-content, and I didn't attend the rest of the morning, but I could just see from the agenda all of these activities that we are talking about. And I know what happens. It's very ubiquitously, everybody thinks connections are there, but there is a lot that goes on in the background to make that happen. Multidisciplinary work. There is so much of activity out there in the Internet 2 forum that you can look at, especially for gifted students, how to get them out and get them into the higher level college courses. So that's something more. And then I've listed a few additional resources that come to mind as we do that. So
thank you, Pankaj. Stu, can you give us a brief overview of what's the picture like here in Franklin County, and what do we have, and what are we missing?
Great. Thank you. I'm Stu Johnson, Executive Director of Connect Ohio. We're a nonprofit whose mission is to expand and accelerate broadband access, adoption, and use. And I want to thank Pankaj. And today, just a couple hours ago, Columbus was rated among the top 7 intelligent communities in the world. And we were only one of 3 in North America, and I can tell you a lot of that is because of Pankaj and Ornet. I was in a conference in D.C. last year, and one of the presenters was a school district. I won't mention the state, but she had 200 buildings, and she'd used stimulus money to build out infrastructure, and she was proud to say that 20 of those 200 schools now had T1 access, which is 1.5, and she hoped within the next 3 years to get the rest of them connected. Pankaj has been out this since like 1996. 1 gig is almost 1,000 times faster than a T1, so it's great work that these guys are doing. One of the things we do is mapping for the FCC, and you'll have this map in your folder. It's kind of hard to see, but I'm glad to be here because usually I spend my time in the areas that don't have any access, which is the unshaded area. But this is layered. The yellow is fiber. The salmon is cable modem. The lavender is DSL. The dark blue is mobile wireless, and the green is fixed wireless. And then unshaded is unserved. So I was in Gallia County, Gallipolis on Tuesday. Business was closing down. They offered 100 employees the opportunity to work from home. Only 45 of them had internet access at their house. That's a barrier. That's beyond the digital gap there. But if we really drill down in Franklin County, this is why I'm glad to be here, we're totally covered. It's not 100%, it's about 99.59. There are a couple houses on Lockbourne Road and a couple on the west side of the county, but downtown Columbus is totally covered up with several choices of modality, whether it's mobile DSL, fixed wireless, or mobile wireless. Then we also look at density of providers. How many providers are there? And you can see that this shows the darker the shade is the number of choices. And in a lot of cases, Columbus has 6 choices, whether it's DSL, cable, sometimes 2 cables, several mobile, and there's several mobile wireless providers. Next, we look at, okay, so that's the supply side. The supply side is covered up. Especially in the school buildings, but also in the neighborhood. So then we look at adoption. About 72% of folks in Franklin County adopt the internet. It is available, they adopt. That's about state average right now. So as we go through these graphs, I'll try to just point out the outliers. Don't use internet, and the city of Columbus is 7%, and the state it's about 18%. So what that indicates is there is digital literacy here, and there is, the ability to use a computer, which is good. Use the internet someplace other than home is higher than the state average. But I think that's because there's so many public computing places available. It's easy to walk down to a library. Again, if you go to Morgan County and you don't have access and you've got to drive 40 miles to a McDonald's, it makes it a little bit harder. But here, since there are so many public places to use a computer, there is more reliance on other places. Subscribe to dial-up at home, state average is 3%. Columbus is at 8%. Now, what would that mean? So we have somebody that has a computer and has digital literacy, has access available, and chooses dial-up. Got to be a price situation. Then we look at service levels. Is the speed what's advertised? What's the price? How's the bill? How's the customer service? Residents in Columbus have a 95% satisfaction. I wish I had that at home. So the service is good. What's the price look like? In 2008, we were a tad above the state average. Now we're a tad below, but again, it's a satisfactory pricing. So we have good access, good coverage, good price. This graph looks at what the adopters are doing on the internet. I circled two things. As you can see, Columbus or Franklin County is at or above the state, except for two categories. And one is searching for jobs, and the other one is taking online classes, which would indicate that of the adopters, there's a higher propensity of educated working people. In other words, there's a gap. The non-adopters, chances are the ones looking for a job and students. Not a good thing. Any questions that make sense to everybody? Among the residents, what are the barriers to internet adoption? I don't own a computer is above the state average. I don't need the internet. Now, that's an interesting one. My dad used to say we didn't need air conditioning. And it's easier to say I don't need it than I can't afford it, or I don't know how to spell, or I'm scared to death. So that ends up to be a catch-all, but we like to grab it because it does tell us a lot. I can get access somewhere else, 34% compared to state average of 10. Again, that's something to be proud of, but again, FCC Chairman Janikowski last summer released a report that said high school graduation rate is 8% higher when there's broadband internet in the home. In the home. We can talk about blended learning, flipped learning, flex learning, online learning, you can call it whatever you want. But it's putting more and more demand at home. And if we don't have it at the home, it's just not practical. But the good news is here, there are a lot of public computing centers. Again, if you get out in Appalachia, out in rural areas, it's a real problem. And there's some digital learning things. I don't feel comfortable enough with the internet, but really it's a combination of price and digital literacy and owning a computer. So if they don't own a computer, what are the barriers to computer ownership? Interesting, it's too expensive is the one that sticks way out. And then again, once again, you see I can use a computer at a different location. So you kind of see a theme here. Now we look at by demographics. My understanding is it's about 80% of the students in Columbus are on the free lunch program. I mean, there's some percentage, obviously, of low-income folks. So if you look at the low-income category compared to the state average, you can see it's about 25 basis points off, if not more, on every category, whether it's adoption, computer ownership, or mobile usage. So while there's 72% adoption in the general population, if you drill that down into the low income, it drops to 46%, no college education, 54%. There's a good chance that well over 50% of the households of your students don't have internet access at their house. So it boils down to here are the barriers to adoption. Number one is availability. And again, in Gallipolis, if you don't have that's an immovable barrier. You can't adopt if it's not available. Second is digital literacy. And then the rest of them get a little bit murky, because if you don't know how to use a computer, it's certainly not relevant in your life. And if it's not relevant in your life, why would you pay a nickel for it? So those things kind of bleed over, and they start with digital literacy. And again, Pew Research did a study where they found that 81% of the non-adopters admitted that they didn't have enough knowledge to get onto the internet or do email. And that's the ones who admitted it. 81% of the non-adopters have a digital literacy issue. So that's the first step. And then you build relevance by adoption and use, and then obviously the cost component. So what are we doing about it? We do training, just briefly, we do training in 250 locations across the state. 24 of them are in Columbus. Columbus Metropolitan Library has a wonderful lab in all their branches. We're at Impact. We're at Columbus Public Schools, Adult and Community Education. We do a 6-hour free class. We've trained 3,500 folks. Again, 81% walk in without any knowledge to get on the internet or do an email. 74% walk out saying that they'll adopt to the internet. So that's kind of the first step. Second step, we've made some agreements for refurbished computers, and this is what's called fixed wireless, if you guys don't know. This is something you can plug into the wall. It's got service all throughout Columbus. It's $10 a month if there's a student in the house. We've put these flyers in some school systems, and we just don't get a lot of attraction. Of course, those people get so many things like me in their mail back from the school. But that's what we've tried, and we're doing all we can.
I have a question.
Yes.
About the $10 a month program. Is that available right here in Columbus City Schools? Because I thought I called like a couple months ago to get that information for some parents, and it wasn't available here.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I live way up in Powell, and it's on the map. It says it doesn't work, but if I plug it in on a second floor window, it works fine. But inside 270, 100%. Okay. So it's $50 to buy the modem, and then $10 a month for the service. And it, I could plug it in right here. It's portable. Again, you have to have a student in the home to qualify. Quickly, Eric asked me to come up with a couple examples. We're doing some work in Nashville. Connect Ohio is part of Connected Nation. We've done work in 30 states. We're in 14 now. We're doing some things in Nashville. Nashville went for Race to the Top. Didn't get it. Didn't get that grant, but still wants to do some things. So we're working with them on putting together a foundation, doing some public awareness, working with the providers to get a low-cost service, trying to get some equipment providers to participate. I also want to mention Licking Valley Schools has a great program, one-on-one. I think they have 600 and some odd students, 9 through 12. They had 100% participation, where the student pays $50 a year for a maintenance and service contract. And they, like Tom said, it worked out to a net sum with the savings with the textbooks. So I think that's all I've got. If you have any questions, I'll stick around.
So Pankaj and Stu, thank you so much. I thought it was important to get, thank you, we can thank them for the information. Again, I thought it was important to get a baseline set of facts going, and I see hands already jumping up. So Alex, go ahead.
So I'm glad I waited on my earlier question, because I've over here been calculating ever since Janet asked the question of access, which I think is a very important question. I just think it's very, very doable. So, would stand the risk of being corrected, but 50,000 students in the city of Columbus for $20 million, we could give everybody one of these iPads with a year of service. City of Columbus Public Schools sold a piece of property for $20 million this week. They have an $8 million textbook budget. United Way has a $50 million budget. Our economic development has $8 million budgets. We could give every live birth that's destined for the city of Columbus, which would be about 5,000 based on my calculation, at birth, Tanny, a iPad for $2.5 million. I think if it's a priority, out of a $1 billion budget in the school district, we could make it happen. And so I just think it's a non-issue from the standpoint of availability. I think it's a question of priority.
And I'd go even
please,
another point to it, because I think you're probably right without having all of the numbers. I think there's another piece to it. I'll say household or parental engagement. I mean, absolutely. I mean, even if it was available, getting the parent there. And even, I know that for some folks now, there's a gentleman in town by the name of Keith Key who builds quality low-income housing in parts of the world other than Columbus. And one of the things that he does before someone can rent or go to one of his units, they all come with what you need, is for the parent to go through the training and classes. Because I think that this could be a bigger impediment as the fact that it's not there. Even around the decision of parents making the choices now, they just don't understand the importance of it. So the two things combined. Alice, I absolutely agree with you, but I think there's a real, I don't want to call it a selling point, but it's that parental or household engagement also.
Yeah, totally agree. You know, my kids are a whole lot smarter in technology than I am. I learn from them every day. When Lori started school, neither she nor her mother spoke English, and it was Lori who came home and taught her mother English. You know, and so I think it works both ways. And I think with technology, that is certainly an impact. I just don't want us to get into our minds that cost become a big impediment to the access, especially in a place like Columbus, in which we have greater connectivity than most places.
So let me ask Tom, who's traveling the country all the time. You know, our commission says, just do it, right? Just give them all devices and access, and we'll get the best price that we can and negotiate the best price, but just do it. What do you think? I mean, are people doing that? Why?
Yes.
Yes.
There's no excuse not to.
Are there models out there, somebody doing, or would we be the first to say just do it?
No. You know, Maine was an early leader. We're doing this one.
Oh, you have yours.
Maine was an early leader. It might be the only state that'll support one-to-one, but probably half the kids in South Dakota are in one-to-one districts because the state ran a small grant program that supported it. Probably 40% of the kids in Iowa are in one-to-one districts. So I think by 2016, the majority of schools in the United States are going to be high access environments. They may not be a one-to-one, but they'll be twice the level of access that we have today. So I think the key is just for a few community leaders to set the goal and then begin working towards that goal. And as you pointed out, with just 2 or 3 budget cycles, you really can shift. You can shift how you're spending money and make this possible. Let me put it this way. We're running 2 systems today. We're running a print education system and a tech system, and we do both poorly. So there's not quite enough textbooks for everybody, and there's not quite enough computers for everybody. And the point is, if you just say, most of our instructional materials are going to be digital by 2015, we're going to make sure every kid has an access device, and we're going to change the way we do professional development and buy materials. It's very affordable.
But again, you know, I mean, just for provocative thought, don't hold me to, you know, cameras can run and say, well, Fisher said. But if I recall from our school levy committee discussions, roughly per 1,000 students, you spend about $80 million in facilities from first grade to graduation. And if you run a 25-year life cycle on that, that means over the life of a kid, you're spending about $40,000 a year in facilities cost. Okay, you know, start to reimagine, Eric, you know, the redeployment, you know, away from a bricks and mortar society, which is what I'm hearing all day today, to a different type of society, and the reallocation of resources. To your question, what do I get excited about? One of the things I get excited about is the cost leveling aspect that technology provides us, but only if we think about it differently. If we're going to keep building the classrooms of yesterday, you know, for the next 20 years, we won't get the cost savings. But if we're going to reimagine what the City of Columbus Public Schools are in a different era, then, you know, perhaps we can.
Particularly at the high school level, you can clearly reimagine what facilities look like. You heard an example this morning where kids are at school 2 days a week and off campus 2 days a week. You can sort of combine the Graham schools, used an experiential learning model. So you could have an experience that's off campus, community or work connected for a couple days a week, and on campus for a couple days a week. So you can reimagine what the place called school looks like. It clearly can cost a lot less than it does today. The other thing we didn't talk about is it is possible in these blended learning models to create staffing structures that are more efficient.
And that's actually a great transition, because I was going to take the opportunity to say we've been focused so far in this discussion on students in their homes having access, but of course the professionals, the teachers, are a critical part of this. And again, we started the day with Rhonda's survey. So Rhonda, do you want to help us think about what teachers are interested in this area too?
Well, teachers want access the same way that we want access for students. And you probably think, well, why don't you have access? There are computers in everybody's classrooms, aren't there? And that is certainly not the case. There might be a classroom where you have 0 computers. In many you might have 1, and in some you might have 4, and in some other places you might have a computer lab. So what we do want is access. And not just to hardware, but access to wireless technology and support for that. Our elementary teachers use this iPod device to test students on reading comprehension. And they have to actually hold it up or have on a foil hat to try to sync. Because the one wireless access point is in the library upstairs. So you have to sync either at the end of the day, the beginning of the day, or take your whole class with you and go sync. Or if you lost all your material because things don't work all the time, then you have to go and do it all again. And so that's why you saw that slide about 90% of our teachers are very frustrated about technology, because it is hindering us from doing our work, not just the digital work, not the work on the computers, but it hinders us from doing our daily tasks, like taking attendance, taking lunch, and that kind of thing. So I think that's number 1. 2 is professional development and training. And while many might think that all the teachers in Columbus are as old as I am, I'm like the oldest person there. The average years of teaching experience is 15. So we have quite a young staff. And then we want a stable, reliable network and computers and technology, and we want timely support. So when a teacher calls with an issue, that it gets fixed. I know OEA is the service provider for our computers in our office. I can call on the phone and it gets fixed immediately. If the teacher calls the help desk, it may be fixed that day, but more than likely it's the following week before anything gets resolved. And that could be anything from some type of hardware issue to needing a bulb for the LCD projector. So what our teachers have done is they have plan A, and we have plan B. Somebody talked about that. I think it was the superintendent from Southwestern City Schools. We have plan A, we're going to use technology in our classroom, and then we have plan B if it doesn't work that day. And plan B might include, I brought my own LCD projector, and I bought the smart board in my room, and I brought my own laptop. So that's my plan B. But if you didn't purchase that, then your plan B, then you're resorting to paper, pencil kinds of things. So our teachers would love to have these types of learning environments if they in fact work, but that's the reality check that it often doesn't.
So Eric, I'm not going to behave now this afternoon. If you can sit here on this commission for the last 2 or 3 meetings, and not just listen to the last 3 minutes and not just simply be outraged to say this isn't acceptable, and for us to publicly say that, sorry, whoever's running all of this doesn't get my confidence. That's not acceptable. It's not an issue of money. Do the math. 5,000 teachers, $500 iPads, $2.5 million. Get it solved. So I'm going to just ratchet it just a little bit because I've got this just strong bias for action. If we can't get the little things solved, then we'll never reimagine the city of Columbus Public Schools.
So I'll admit that I heard a little bit of this from Rhonda before, and I was thinking about the commission makeup because I share the outrage Alex just expressed. And I was thinking, we do this every day, don't we, already? So I'm going to put Chad on the spot because I was looking down the list of companies. Thinking, wait a minute, Nationwide Insurance, right? They've got salesmen running around all over the country, don't they? With with devices, and they're communicating with customers, and customers are communicating with you. And doesn't your whole business depend on it? If something breaks down and they make a phone call, does it get fixed? I mean, for goodness sakes, how do you do it?
It better get fixed, or else we go out of business. Right?
Yeah, right.
So, just a little bit of a paradigm shift. So, take it to private sector. We've got 34,000 employees around the country in every state. Some people work in offices. Some work from home. Some are mobile, as Eric was saying. So our claims people, for example, during time of disaster, when you've got some technology knocked out, they need to be connected, and we figured that out. So, with George Barrett's company, being international, and we're more of a domestic company, you know these challenges are in front of you, and you have to fix them. If not for technology and how to use it to make data-driven decisions that drive the analytics, which make good decisions on behalf of the business in real time, we wouldn't be in business. Somebody else would figure it out. Janet's got her hand up.
For-profit, nonprofit. 12 years ago, before I came to United Way, my predecessor, Brian Gallagher, and other United Ways said, we've got to figure out the technology pieces that we need, and literally built our own company. UPIC services us. I mean, I knew I shouldn't be in the business of technology. Outsourced it. It's still growing. And for what we do, whether it's on the community impact side or fundraising, and I'm with Rhonda, I think I'm older. For those of you who've known me, hey, they've got me to the smartphone, the iPad, and everything else because we've got to do this in our business. I mean, you have to do it, and I can't think of a business where you don't.
Right. So let me follow up with a couple thoughts on that. So, you think about your customer. So in our business model, we exist to serve our customers. If not for the students, why would we have school districts, right? So very analogous in that regard. But technology is used not to just serve your customer or the student. It's also used to support your operations, right? So you need the analytics and the support in a 360 model. You need the talent to do it. We have, with 34,000 people, thousands of people literally who are in our IT area. We make that investment. They all don't do the same thing. They run projects, they do development, they do implementation, they interface with vendors that we might have. They support our staff anywhere in the country at any time. So you need help, here's a number, you get it automatically. But we also use it on professional development. We're not in a model as a national platform, and George is nodding where I'm going on this. Our HR systems are set up to do development online with online training modules. So there's accountability to it. When the person's done it. There's testing that goes with it. Of course, we do interface with our HR models as well, but we also make an investment because it is a priority, to Alex's point. If you don't have the right technology to serve the purpose of the business you're in and why you exist, and it's somewhere down on your funding list, you have to ask the question, why is that? Why haven't we made the investment?
We had a hand from George, and then and Tom wants also a comment, and Reverend Gilliard. Let's we do Tom's response, and then George, and then Reverend Gilliard.
So I wrote a blog about this a couple weeks ago, and it is a nearly universal concern about tech support, but there's a 4 or 5 point plan that can help. So if a district, as I described it, makes a commitment to the equity layer to make sure that every kid has a production device and that the district is prepared for online assessment, then with that you can buy a thin layer of support. Maine and Mooresville that I mentioned before have done that. So in the RFP that they put out, they ask for a level of support. So they get phone and online support for teachers and kids. And because most of this stuff is now cloud-based, you have another layer of DIY where it's just much easier to fix stuff yourself. So DIY plus phone plus online, then a help desk at school, and then the final layer. For 20 years, people have been engaging kids in providing tech support. So at the secondary level, students should be an active part of a tech support team because it provides them real responsibility and real work experience. So it's worked well. It's widely used. GenYes.org is the group that sponsors it. So if a district layers support in, they can make it adequate. But it will always be a challenge for a district, particularly when they move sort of past one-to-one. When you add BYOD, then in the acceptable use policy that you send home with mom and dad, it says you're on your own for supporting that device. You know, the district has to support a limited number of devices. If you invite other devices in, you take care of the tech support on your own.
Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, so I certainly share some of the outrage I've heard, but I will say this: we will probably feel a number of things along these coming weeks that cause this outrage. Right? That's why we're here. So
it'll get worse.
As my organization says, just a level set. So I hate that word. So here's what I would say that. And I know our IT people scream at me all the time for trying to oversimplify this, so I won't try to do it now. But I will say this. Tom, you talked earlier about you do this leadership. You decide what's important, and you decide what you're going to not do and what you are going to do. And I think that's part of the charge here. So we will have to say, during this process, our strategy, the outcome we're looking for is, our strategy to get there is, that will the 5 X things have to happen. Here are derailers. We will not allow those to derail us. You know, the sports analogy is we will not let that one score beat us. If technology or the infrastructure issue is one of those, then, as Alex said, then we need to say, priority basis, that's one of the derailers. We are not going to let that get in our way. I think the key is to chart the course. What do we want to look like? Where does technology play? How does it play a role? If some of what Tom's saying is what we want to be, then we're going to have multiple layers. There's going to be this infrastructure issue that we're going to have to deal with as a city/region. Right. And then there's that interface part, which is a whole different layer. And we'll have to deal with both. And I think what I'm hearing is we probably have got problems in both. But partly it's because as a leadership, as a strategy, we didn't say this was a critical path to do what we want to do, or we didn't say, by the way, it's sort of on the critical path and there's a derailer and we didn't tackle it. So I just think it's going to be about the choices that we make.
Let me just again underscore how useful the online assessment can be as a pivot point. So you should say, you know, not later than fall of 2014, that there's no possible scenario where any classroom would not have a high level of Wi-Fi access. Because a couple months after that, you're going to be running the state test online. So it has to work, right? So you just have to work back from that. You have to do an assessment. You have to put a timeline together. And you have to have a set of fail-safe to make sure that there's high access in every classroom. And that would be a very minimum of 100 meg for every 1,000 users next year. And then you have to do it again because you'd want to go to a gig for 1,000 users by 2017. Now, these are guidelines by the National Tech Support Organization. So you just have to manage to those.
Pastor Gilliard, we put you next to Alex on purpose because we knew your calm, your calm spiritual demeanor would absorb the energy that is coming from that corner. So, Reverend, we'd love to hear your comments.
Well, I've been next to him too much.
He's working the other way.
He's got me roused up. I do want to say that I think that the mayor has given us a mandate here, and I think that it's moving in that direction, and I think most of the leadership here is to be thanked for it. I do think that when it comes to these areas, it's awfully easy to point out discrepancies. And I think in this particular case, I'd feel a bit more comfortable with hearing both sides. Because oftentimes, people can sometimes explain to you why they do what they do. Sometimes it don't make sense. It might not be the right thing to do, but at least they can sometimes share with you why they do what they do. And I think that I'd be comfortable in hearing that. You know, certainly with Mrs. Johnson, she's a part of the puzzle, but she's not the whole puzzle. And there's a reason why it takes that fellow a week to do certain things, and I'd be interested.
Thank you, Pastor. We will take you up on that suggestion. Yeah. Absolutely. Councilwoman Tyson. Oh, I'm sorry. If you'll excuse me, Councilwoman, Lolita had her hand.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. I just want to say, just after listening to this conversation and then the conversation earlier, I mean, we're all here for a reason. And certainly the issues and concerns that we heard in our last meeting and even in the first meeting when we received this charge, I think most of us sitting around this table probably had no idea, well, I'm going to speak for myself, had no idea of all the information that we have received over the last, I would say, 3 meetings. And like I said, we were put here for a charge. And I do believe if we look at education systems across the country, most education systems across the country are doing what's probably been done in Columbus City Schools. And that we are now embarking upon, with all this new knowledge, we understand technology, we understand where we need to move in terms of technology, in terms of educating our young people. We certainly want to make sure that as we're educating our young people, if we go to listen to what the gentleman said from the superintendent from Southwestern Schools, and I agree, we have to make sure that our students are going to exit emotionally, socially, and physically prepared. But, you know, at this point, you know, our system is what it is, and we are charged to be able to make sure that we move forward in making sure that our children have the opportunity to be as successful as they can be. And so I know whether or not people are managing things the way we want to run our businesses or are running businesses or not, it is what it is. And so our charge is to just listen to what the issues are, and from those issues and from what we're learning, to improve our system. And so, you know, as Reverend Gilliard said, maybe there's a reason why it's happened. But whatever the reason is, it really, at this point, I'm not going to cast it. It's not even worth casting any aspersions against the system or anything is. Like they said, you know, we meet people, we meet the system where it is. And what do we want to do to move the system forward?
The only thing I'll add is, as we take Ms. Augustine's comment, is that I'm also cognizant of the mayor's charge that this isn't just about the school district, but about what we can all do. So I heard clearly from Stu and Pankaj and Tom, the city can help with this. Perhaps there's a role for the business community, which is one of the reasons why I called on Chad, United Way, and others. And I wanted us to see what the resources are that are available as we begin to sift through what we would want to recommend on this very, very important subject. Ms. Augustine.
Okay. First, I want to say to Alex, thank you for that lovely statement. Strong bias for action, because I'm going to take it. And so when you hear it again, just be okay with that, because I'm going to pretend it's mine. And then my question is, now for the system to work, we give all the kids computers, and for them to work with the equipment that we have, I don't know, in some districts it may take a T1, and in other districts it may take an entire DS3. So what I want to know is, the services that you offer, which schools are utilizing your services? Because you said there are some in Columbus. What are some examples so that I can look into it myself and see how it's working?
And can I amend also, because in addition to our charge about all of us helping with the solution, our charge is also about all the children who live within the school district, whatever school they go to. So are you also working with charter schools? Can we be helpful? Is there a digital divide there as well, where we can be helpful and supportive with homeschooling, with the other settings in which students are also getting their education?
That's my first one. And then my second one is, so what kind of service for a large district would that require, if that makes sense?
Okay, I'll get started. I'm sure Stu can join in. So, as I mentioned in my presentation, ORNet does not connect directly with the school district. It's 270, 315, and then a local route, right? So that local route is really what brings the school districts back into the ITC, the Information Technology Centers. Those are the 33 around the state and the 9 metropolitan school districts. Those last miles are really decided by the schools to come back into the ITCs. And I know there is E-rate funding that's being used, federal funding, in order to get those last miles. The ITCs then are connected back to ORNet, and the speed today is anywhere from 1 gig to 10 gig for that middle mile, which connects all of these school districts back into our backbone.
Okay.
So that's how much information, but go ahead.
So I'm a little confused because my question is, what is a service, or how is a school connected to you, or which school, do you know of any schools that's connected so that I can have a tangible, something I can look at?
To my knowledge, almost 99% of the school districts within the state are connected back to the backbone in this manner. So the ITCs connect the school districts, bring them into the hub, and then the ITCs connect back into the ORNet backbone.
So then no school owns their own DTC?
No school owns
their own pub, or they don't have their own. They're just connected into you.
Generally speaking, yes. And their internet services are also provided through us. In other words, we buy in bulk, and all of the internet activities that go on the school, we buy from the private providers like CenturyLink, like AT&T, and then that is passed.
So does anyone use your services to buy packages that would include teachers and parents, individual services as well?
No, the household services are not part of the backbone, because that is something that private sector generally provides.
But Stu,
that's where Stu comes in with.
Okay.
But he's connected the districts, but the key is the connection from the district to the school, and then from the school to the classroom, right? Because you could have a school that has a gig connection, but there's not, it's the last mile, it's the Wi-Fi hub in a remote classroom, right? So
that's what's important to me. Like, that's why my question is, because some of the districts that I've been in, they're like really slow, or they don't work. So that's why it's important to me, so I can know what is working, or where do you fit in, and what it needs to connect to make it faster to get it to work.
So I think there was a study done by ETAC and Ohio Department of Education, I'm told, which had list of all the school buildings and the last mile connectivity. I'm not I don't have it on me, but I'm sure that's available. It was done a year and a half. But I think what Tom mentions is exactly, it's a problem everywhere. So again, I understand we are talking about school districts, but one of the things we are trying to raise the bar is all of the higher education institutions, which I can speak for because that is our starting point, must be connected or have an incentive to connect it at least 1 gig directly into the backbone. So I'm just giving you some relevance.
A super specific next step. The commission could recommend and even participate in ensuring that by not later than, pick a date, September 30, you've tested the broadband in every single classroom in every school in the city. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple widely available tests that where you can make it really easy to check the level of connectivity you have. So you could do a survey, and you could have kids help you do that survey, but you could know really quickly and for free what the distribution, what the access level is in every classroom in the city.
What would be my
regrettably, if I may, regrettably, we have to draw matters to a conclusion. I want to thank our panel, each of you individually, and I'm sure everybody here agrees with me that this has been a tremendous discussion and presentation. And I also would ask, Eric, that you would reduce in the same manner that we asked you about the presentation this morning, if you could capsulize what's been shared this afternoon with regard to technology, have your staff pull that together in a form that we can take a look at and get all the highlights. I'd appreciate that, and I appreciate, I'm making that as a motion in effect. Do I have a second? Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will do that, and both with this morning and afternoon, attempt not only to encapsulate the stream of conversation, but also put forward some proposed recommendations that you can begin to discuss and see whether we're on the right track. So thank you for that. And I also want to thank our speakers. We've just had an enormous amount of expertise in the room today, and we're very, very grateful. And to our local experts, who I'm sure will be continuing to draw on. And Tom, I hope you'll let us continue to draw on your expertise. Thank you for coming all the way from the West Coast to be with us. If I could, just before we adjourn, remind everybody that February 8th is our next meeting. Once again, we have two very important topics. In this case, we're going to be talking about teachers. I know that subject has come up a lot, but also the career ready expertise. Tom, you're still Mike, just to remind you. Also the subject of career ready, the alignment to workforce that we've been alluding to as well. That meeting is going to be back at Columbus State Community College. Once again, the gracious host, Dr. Harrison, and the room we were in the first time, so you'll be familiar with where we're going. Yes, Ms. Jackson.
And this may already be a part of what we do, but in an effort to at least have a thorough review of the materials before the meeting, I would want to have it on the Friday before, because I use weekend time to try to go through this. And so I don't know if that's going to be pushing the staff, but if you could get it to us, I'll even say by 4 p.m., not after 5, it would be helpful so we can get it downloaded and take it home. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Heard loud and clear. And is everybody's been able to use the website where the information is posted adequately? I know some of us still download it, but I just want to make sure it's easy to access the information. Yes, Madam Chair. Yes.
It's coming up at the end. It's not work. Is it working? Oh, it is. Yeah. I'm sorry. Just to remind everyone of the school visits, if you've got the dates and times.
Yes. And please, for the first one, the Kids Ohio folks do need to know who's planning on going to the first one. So if you're able to go, please let Mark or Ann, who are right there, know that you're able to attend that event. Oh, Ann's in the back. Thank you. Madam Chair, back to you. We're all done. All right.
Any questions, comments? May I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you.
Thank you to the Ohio State team that's been helping us today all around the room. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure. Yes.
Thank you.